There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
But Jesus is telling these people that are willing to follow Him that if somebody sues you for your tunic, which they could do, that you're to give them your cloak also. And what your cloak was, it was your outer garment. It was your coat. And to people who didn't have much, it was also used as their blanket. And that would be the only thing that they would have to keep themselves warm at night. But you couldn't be sued for your cloak. It couldn't be taken away from you because that was protected in the Mosaic Law. And it's written about in Exodus 22:26 and in Deuteronomy 24:13. And so what Jesus is saying, that if they do that, if they sue you for your tunic, that you freely offer your cloak. Just like you freely turn your cheek when you're insulted. And like He's going to say, where you walk a second mile when you're forced to walk 1 mile, because the Roman soldiers, what they could do is they had the right they'd put their spear on your shoulder or their sword on your shoulder, and they could command you to carry their bags for a mile. And they could do that to any citizen, and they had to. And so what Jesus is telling us is that when we are wronged, instead of taking out our revenge or demanding our rights, we need to have the attitude of suffering that loss ourselves. Because although they can harm us on the outside, they can never harm us on the inside. And this shows everyone our willingness to be able to help sinners, that we want to help them. This ability to overlook these types of wrongs. And when you have that ability and when you overlook it, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And that's how you try to bring about peace. So we're not supposed to fight every insult or injustice we encounter. We're always supposed to respond kindly and generously. And the reason is because that's God's nature, who's been continually insulted and slandered since the beginning of creation by all people. But He still shows us kindness with His generosity and with His love. And that leads us on to this next part where Jesus says again, you heard it said, because this is what the Pharisees were teaching. You shall love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. And God never said that. God only said, love your neighbor. And that's written in Leviticus 19:18. But they added the other part, hate your enemy. And the Jews, they considered all uncircumcised Gentiles as their enemies. But God, He didn't see these people as their enemies. He saw them all as their neighbors. And the Jews, they were called to love them and to bless them and to do good to them because God, He loves all people. And so Jesus here, He tells us to love our enemies, and He tells us to pray for them and to do good to them no matter how they treat you. And He doesn't say that it will change them, but what He's saying is that it will change us, and you will be like your Father in heaven. And then we're given a really good example of how God does this, of how God loves His enemies and how God blesses His enemies the same way He blesses us. And He blesses them with the blessings of rain and with prosperity and with sunshine and all these wonderful things that we all receive in life. And if you do this, and if you love your enemies, it says here that you're going to get a reward. But if you don't, you won't. And then Jesus uses an example of the most despised person in Jewish culture and in Israel. And He says, if you don't do this, you're no better than a tax collector, because even the tax collectors, well, they love other tax collectors. And he's saying, you're all called to be better than them because you're called to be perfect like your Father in heaven. And we're supposed to all resemble him because the law never taught to hate your enemies. And you see, for Christians, love has always been expressed here as an act of your will. It's not just the feelings of your emotions. And that word that Jesus uses here about being perfect, it doesn't mean that you're being required to be sinless. It really just means completeness. And it means as children of God, we're supposed to have maturity. We're supposed to act mature. Because our Father in heaven, he loves his enemies, of whom we once were. And he wants us to help make his enemies become his children. So we're still on that hillside with Jesus as he's teaching his disciples, along with those who have been following him in Jesus' greatest sermon ever, the Sermon on the Mount. And we remember that this is a mixed crowd of Jews and Gentiles, and they're from all over Israel. And so far, Jesus has taught what a disciple or citizen of heaven, what he should be like, of how his disciples should be in their hearts. And Jesus did this through the teaching of the Beatitudes. And then Jesus, he went on and he taught them not only what they should be like, but he actually taught them what they actually were in this world and what type of an effect that they should have on the world, that they are salt and light. Salt because the world is decaying, and light because the world is in darkness. And Jesus went on to tell his disciples that they need to be more righteous than the scribes and the Pharisees. And then Jesus, he goes through the law with them, and he clarifies between what they've heard and what they've been taught and what's the truth. And how God did not only require an external obedience to God's law, but an internal obedience from each individual's heart, and how the sins of murder and adultery, how they all begin in the heart in the forms of anger and lust, and how we need to deal harshly with sin by immediately cutting it off. And Jesus, he clears up what has been mistaught about God's view on divorce and about taking oaths and on retribution and revenge, and how we are to be able to take an insult without insulting back, and how we're not always to demand our rights, and how we're to be kind and to be generous with those people who oppress us and the ones that mistreat us, and that we're not only to love our neighbors, but we're to love our enemy, and how that makes us like our Father in heaven, because that's how he is. And these people, they've never heard anything like this before, and they had absolutely no idea that God thought this way. And they're learning that God has always thought like that. They just never knew it. And today, a lot of people, they think that the God of the Old Testament is different than what we see in Jesus in the New Testament, that there's like two different gods. But he's not. It's just that Jesus reveals to us how God has always been and how he is. Because everything that we do see in Jesus is exactly the same as God the Father. But up until now, nobody has ever revealed such marvelous truths until Jesus revealed them. And we would have never learned these truths by just observing the world and by the way that people treat each other. These truths have been lost since the beginning of creation, until Jesus revealed them to us again. And so now Jesus, he's going on, and he's in chapter 6, and he begins to teach us. And as he addresses his disciples, and he's going to teach them how they are to worship. And these are the things that we're to do as his disciples in the church, of how we're to give in our giving, and how we're to pray in public and in private, and how we're to fast when we fast. So Jesus, he begins with the performing of charitable deeds. And he starts with telling his disciples how not to do this. And charitable deeds, if you read this in the old King James Version of the Bible, it's translated as alms. But this is more than just money for the poor. And that's what alms means. Alms just means money for the poor. But the Greek word here is alimosune, which means righteousness or charity or kindness. Also, it can mean mercy and pity. But to the Jewish mind, to give alms and to be righteous were exactly the same thing. And the giving of alms was a very big part of Jewish worship. So what Jesus is teaching here includes the giving of alms, but it should also be expanded into the doing of charitable deeds, of doing good works. And Jesus says to take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men or to be seen by them. Now, this does not mean that you're not supposed to let your light shine before men, because Jesus just said that just in the last chapter, in chapter 5:16, and we just heard that last week. So Christians should be seen doing good works, but these hypocrites, and if you remember that to be a hypocrite means that you're an actor, that you're wearing a mask, that you're pretending to be somebody that you're not. And this is what he calls these religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees. But that their real intentions in doing these good works, they didn't do them because of the need of the poor. But their real intention was of the proclaiming of their own righteousness through good works, to draw attention to their giving. And Jesus, he starts describing what they've all seen, the blowing of trumpets as they give. And some people believe that the Pharisees, that they actually had someone blow a trumpet when they gave a large gift. And that when the trumpet was sounded, that the poor in the area, that they would know that there were resources at the temple for them to come and get. But others believe that this trumpet he's talking about is a trumpet-shaped funnel going into the poor box, into the coffer for the poor. And that when you threw your coins into that trumpet-shaped opening, that it would make a lot of noise. And people would know your generosity by how loud the noise was as your coins went into the box. But Jesus, he makes it clear that if you're going to have your giving seen by men and for the applause of men, enjoy it, because that's all you're going to get. You're going to get nothing from heaven. And the phrase here, have the reward, is the Greek word apachinen. And apachinen is a business word, and it means that you're being paid in full. And so when the Pharisees, when they did give, they thought that they were buying God's favor. They knew they were buying the attention of men, but they also thought that they were buying God's favor. But you can't buy God's favor with money. And the only reason that they were practicing their religion publicly like this was to buy favor with men. And this kind of reminds me sometimes of some of the contractors that you might see, or some of the shop owners or stores, where they always put a little Christian fish on their advertisement or on their business cards.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.